Hey guys, welcome back to Antel Economics, where today we are at podcast 7. We're going to be talking about the future of energy, hosted by myself and Ravi. But before we get into that, we have Tweet of the Week. So today's Tweet of the Week is a tweet about lockdown, responding to BBC News, where we said, the easing of lockdown will help kickstart the recovery of the economy and help build consumer confidence again. Comment down below what you think about this and whether a second peak is coming and how that would affect the economy in terms of lockdown as well. So yeah, Ravi, the future of energy.
The future of energy. So obviously, when we think about energy, I think everyone's most go-to energy is oil. Oil has been very dominant for decades now, and since the massive amount of production in places like the Middle East, from Saudi Arabia,
Yeah.
Iraq, and Iran, they've had a massive impact on the world and how we run things.
Yeah, I mean the oil industry in particular has been one of like huge interest with loads of wars being fought over it, conflict internal and external. It is a huge industry, and the pandemic has helped us recognize that, isn't it?
Yeah, I think the pandemic has been quite crucial for oil. It's affected their prices massively. We've seen a massive slump in the prices of oil, and the demand has also fallen by a third.
Yeah. There's been a stat where the pandemic has wiped out around a third of the global oil demand, as you said, and that's because of the lockdown, because of the travel bans. The consumption of oil is drying out, and there's loads of supply shocks as well. And we're seeing how globalization and how the supply chain extends to every country is really sensitive to these kind of global pandemic type of issues.
Yeah, I think the production as well has been obviously heavily affected. OPEC crude oil, 32% of it is from Saudi Arabia, and this
Yeah.
is a massive impact on their economy. So I think the 2030 plans for Saudi Arabia to obviously improve and develop their economy as a tourist-based economy,
Yeah.
it's had massive setbacks.
Yeah, I completely agree. Like most of these Middle Eastern countries, their primary source is oil, as you said. So it is an opportunity for them, don't you think, that the pandemic presents, where they can start moving their economy into something else? Because it's inevitable that they are going to have to do this in the future, isn't it? We can't always rely on oil, especially when it's a diminishing resource.
Yeah, I think this will be definitely an eye opener. Countries will have to look at other avenues of how they can generate revenue for their country if it's not through natural resources.
Yeah.
And for the Middle East, I think a lot of this is tourism, and they're just going to have to make sure that their tourism industry can flourish better than the countries neighboring.
Yeah. And like in terms of the kind of reliability of oil, the main reason why the pandemic was so impactful was it highlighted the vulnerability of fossil fuels, in terms of storage and distribution. People are looking for a more reliable source of energy as compared to the very export slash import heavy oil.
Yeah, I think the problem with oil, obviously, it can only be found in certain places of the world, and obviously it has to be transported
Mm,
quite quite a long distance to get to say countries like the UK.
yeah,
So it's challenging in the fact of trying to coordinate the whole production and the
yeah,
whole shipping and supply of oil.
yeah, yeah. No, I agree. Yeah.
I think
So yeah, go on.
I was just going to talk about what do you think about the environmental impacts of coronavirus?
Well, obviously there's been loads of articles and newspaper reports about how the lack of travel, the lack of flights, cars, all of that has like helped repair the ozone layer. We're seeing clearer skies, pollution levels been dropping. So without a doubt, I'd agree with all of the media saying that the lockdown has helped the environment in that sense. And I think it's a real eye opener for the public as well as these large governments who are witnessing this change in moving towards green energy.
Yeah, I definitely have to agree with you there. I think the green energy will become really an important fact of how we use energy. The use of
Yeah,
solar panels, renewable energy like wind power, tidal power. I think will be very crucial, especially as oil, as you said, is a diminishing resource and it is slowly but surely, running out. And I think there are predictions between around about 2050, there will be no oil left.
Yeah, but in terms of like recovering the economy, because obviously that's going to be the top of everyone's agenda in terms of economic growth. You know, economies are going to be recovering. Do you think the rate of recovery is important to control to ensure that these environmental benefits that we're seeing now are here to stay?
Yeah, I do think they're very important because obviously, if we go back once lockdown is over and we start drilling and pumping oil out of the
Mm,
ground, we try and improve our economy by increasing consumption and the amount of products available. I think it's
mm.
only going to lead to a massive increase in the amount of pollution that industries, lay off, and I think that will just be damaging to all the good work that's happened. That's sort of slowed down the whole climate change that is occurring.
Yeah, but do you think it's inevitable? Because, you know, and if we look at the fastest growth periods in world history, you know, the Industrial Revolution, we look at China, we look at India, all of these processes require, you know, a huge amount of output, and that output is at the expense of environmental kind of degradation, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
So in terms of recovering from the economy, obviously we are much greener than we were 50 years ago or so. But isn't it an expense that we do have to take in order to, you know, reduce unemployment, reduce all these negative social impacts of coronavirus?
Well, I do see your point about how it will be inevitable, but I think this is a time where, countries can look towards implementing green energy, providing subsidies for companies that are green energy startups. And therefore, if we move towards green energy, this means that the environmental impacts that will arise when we try and recover economically won't be as harsh.
Yeah. Yeah, I do see a point, and it's a fair one to raise. I was just, you know, I was thinking about how, like, you know, the longer we stay in this kind of negative economic scenario, the more it's going to inflict damage on the future economy. You know, if less people are working now and it stays that way, the ability for us to recover in the future is going to be harmed. So I think a priority for the government is going to be a fast recovery out of this kind of uh, shocking demand and supply. And so, because of that, I think we can't rely on sustainable growth. Definitely not now.
I think, obviously, as you just said, I don't think we will actually be able to achieve a V-shaped recovery for economic growth. I think that's going to be
Mm,
very optimistic, to
mm,
say the least, because obviously we've just seen from the UK stats, yesterday that they've lost 20.4% of GDP,
yeah.
and to recover this in such short time period, I think is going to be a bit unrealistic considering
Mm,
the loss that has occurred during the pandemic. So
yeah.
I think although it be obviously it is very important to recover the economy as quickly as possible, but I think we should incorporate some sustainable elements alongside it.
Mm, yeah, I agree. I think personally, I just think that the environmental benefits, in order to genuinely um, improve the economy as fast as possible and in the most sustainable way, there is going to be a trade-off, and I think this environmental kind of concern needs to come on the latter half of the recovery stage. I think
Yeah,
now is the most important time to just do it as quickly as possible.
yeah. So you could say that, but then it will always come to the point of, well, eventually you're damaging the future. Whereas if you started slowly and you started with green energy and you just kept on chomping away at it, would
Mm.
it be a better alternative? And we've seen green energy risen by 50% as well. So maybe
Yeah,
that is
yeah,
a sign that people are going to look more towards it.
yeah. No, the future of green energy is looking bright. I mean, the pandemic has provided an opportunity for, you know, the suppliers of green energy to provide for these people who demand a more reliable source of energy. I think there was a stat where this lockdown has actually kick-started the green energy movement by 10 years. Some experts are claiming, and so, you know, it is a good. I think out of the whole pandemic situation, one benefit that we can take from it is the renewal or the revival of the green energy
Yeah,
industry.
I also like add it will help with economic growth as well because there's also been stats saying it could add 42 million jobs to the economy. Obviously, we're about to see mass job loss, mass
Yeah,
unemployment occur, especially in the UK economy where the furlough scheme is going to stop having such a big effect in that job retention,
Yeah.
and maybe the green energy sector will provide a lot of employment for these unemployed workers.
Yeah, yeah. But I think it is a bit unreliable or I think we can't rely on the green energy to provide jobs as such because it is still integrating into society. It's not an established industry, and although it is going to have to be one in the future, I think for short-term recovery we can't rely on that industry to provide us jobs, especially considering how different industries such as travel, hospitality, these are all going to be kickstarting in the next few years.
Yeah, I would have to agree with you there. I think long term it will be, I think it will become a very important factor of the economy, but
Yeah,
for short term recovery, it probably won't have the impact that it could have.
yeah. Just on the back of this kind of like little discussion we're having, do you think short-term growth can be sustainable given the current resources that the UK has?
Um, it could be sustainable, but then again, I think the amount of growth that needs to be recovered is such a large amount. I don't think it's that sustainable. If you sort of see what I mean. I
Yeah,
think it can happen. It can happen, but I think there will be consequences to it happening.
yeah. And in terms of like, obviously, different countries around the world, we only have one world, and all the countries, whatever they do, is affecting this world. And so, even if the UK implement these kind of sustainable growth tactics, countries like China, India,
Yeah.
where rapid development and growth and recovery is a priority, I don't think green energy there is going to be such a focus.
No, I definitely agree with that point. That's a really good point. Obviously, only individual countries can do their bit, but they can't obviously hold accountable other countries that choose to pollute and choose to, destroy the beautiful earth that we live on.
Yeah, yeah, I completely agree. So I think on
That's it.
that note, we should
Yeah.
end.
Yeah. So thank you guys for watching. Make sure you like, subscribe, and comment down below, and help us reach 50 subscribers.
Yeah, thank you guys. Thanks for watching.
Thank
See you.
you.